We have been talking about Asoka and his inscriptions. We tried to assess how Asoka's inscriptions give us the clue to assessing the extent of the Mauryan power, and it's quite clear that during his time the Mauryan Empire reached its maximum expanse nearly to a pan-Indian political control. Now, Asoka's inscriptions within this realm show a particular pattern of distribution. The rock edicts, that is the major rock edicts, are found in what may be called the typical outlying areas of the realm. Take for example, Ashokan rock edicts, major rock edicts have been found at Kalsi near Dehradun, then at Shahbazgadi and Manshera, which are in almost close to the western part of what is present-day Pak-occupied Kashmir area. You have Ashokan major rock edict in Aramaic at Kandahar. The same type of rock edicts are found at Girnar in Kathiawar Peninsula, at Sopara on the Konkan coast to the north of present-day Mumbai, and you get them also at Sannathi in Gulbarga district, Karnataka, in Yeraguddi in the Kundlul area of Andhra Pradesh. And then there are two separate rock edicts at Dhauli and Jaugada in Odisha. This is a very clear pattern of distribution of major rock edicts. While the minor rock edict, the pillar edicts, 7 in number, are found in a very compact zone of the Ganga Valley, which obviously was the core territory of the Mauryan realm. It has a very specific distribution. On the other hand, the minor rock edicts are found strewn over various areas of the realm, that is, they are not specific to any region. It is true that there is a very clear concentration of the minor rock edicts in peninsular India, particularly in Karnataka, parts of Maharashtra, and also parts of western Andhra Pradesh. We'll come back to the explanation why there is a concentration of Ashokan minor rock edicts in peninsular India. There is also an interesting passage in one of Ashoka's edicts where he declares categorically that he is Magadha Raja. Though he is aware that his realm is vast, he also presents himself as primarily the ruler of Magadha. That led Professor Romila Thapar to correctly identify Magadha as the very nucleus of the Mauryan Empire, in the sense that from their political control emanates and all the conquests initiate from that area. If you talk of a particular nucleus area, here in the case of Magadha, and the Raja there is called Magadha Raja, king of Magadha. So there is also a core area, essentially in the Ganga Valley in North India, the Indo-Ganga, the Ganga Yamuna Doab area, where stood prior to the Mauryan Empire a number of Mahajanapadas. These Mahajanapadas gradually became incorporated within the Mauryan realm and formed what is called the core area. If you have a core area, then there is a peripheral area. The peripheral areas are like the Afghanistan area and the northwestern borderland, yielding Ashoka's inscriptions in Aramaic and Greek. And there is also the peninsular part of India is another peripheral area. So there are three distinct zones within Ashokan realm. The metropolitan state of Magadha, the core areas largely in the Ganga plains, and the peripheral areas. And how Ashoka's administration and statecraft spread and controlled these areas may also be examined through his edicts. Now, it is quite clear that Pataliputra was his capital, from where most of his messages were sent out. Now, at Pataliputra, obviously the ruler is there. The Mauryan ruler is obviously the most important figure, the pivotal figure of the entire Mauryan statecraft. And in Ashoka's inscriptions, we find his personal zeal, what he calls pakama or prakrama, exertions towards statecraft, what he calls arthakarma, meaning affairs of the state. He categorically instructs a particular type of his officers called Pativedakas, the messengers, that the Pativedakas or messengers were free to bring to him any matter of importance at any point of time, even when the ruler was in the inner chamber within the royal household, or he was relaxing in the pleasure garden. Irrespective of that, he could be approached by the messengers. So this is one clear example where he's really striving to, in the matters of statecraft. We do not know how exactly the ruler was assisted by a number of functionaries. At least in 2 occasions, we come across in Ashoka's inscriptions the term Purisha, which possibly refers to his Mantri Parishad or a council of ministers. These Mantri Parishad or Purisha was possibly deliberative in nature and not having any executive authority. What was being discussed, including the debates at the Purisha, needed to be reported to the Maurya ruler. This also indicates that the presence of the Mauryan ruler at the time of deliberations in the Mantri Parishad, the council of ministers, was not obligatory. Therefore, how much power and influence this Mantri Parishad wielded, we do not know. But it appears from the study of inscriptions that the principal burden of executive functions were handed over to a particular class of officers who are called Mahamatras in Ashoka's inscriptions. There are 5 types of Mahamatras in Ashoka's records. The first is Anta Mahamatra, that is those officers in charge of the frontier or bordering areas. The second type is Itijhaka Mahamatra, that is Mahamatra type of officers in charge of the inner chamber of the royal household. The third is Bachobhumika Mahamatra, that is the Mahamatras in charge of the Brajabhumi or the pasture grounds. The next type is Nagala Byohalaka Mahamatra, that is Mahamatras of who were also judicial officer in the Nagara Bhavaharika of the class of Mahamatras. The fifth is the last but not the least, the Dhamma Mahamatras, perhaps the most important among these Mahamatras, and this was in fact an Ashokan administrative innovation. The Dhamma Mahamatras were in charge of the propagation of Dhamma throughout the length and breadth of his territory. They are among the very important officers of the realm. Now, apart from these officers, we come across the Rajukas, perhaps district level officers on whom Ashoka entrusted his great faith and trust, considering themselves, the Rajukas, as in charge of a large number of rural people. Janapada Janam. Janapada means rural areas, countryside. People of the Janapada is Janapada Janam. And the Rajukas were entrusted with the welfare of the rural people of the rural areas. They are the Yutas appearing in Ashoka's record were possibly officers in charge of the finance department. At least 2 revenue terms appear in only one inscription of Ashoka, that is the Ruminde pillar inscription, wherefrom we know that Bali, which could have been an obligatory impost on agrarian production, and Bhaga, which is the state's demand of agrarian, of a share of the agrarian produce. These two are definitely collected by the Mauryan state under Asoka. What is very striking in terms of the material condition of the Mauryan times, known from the inscription, is two inscriptions at Lagman in Afghanistan, northeastern Afghanistan, inform us about a royal road, Karapati in Aramaic. And these inscriptions actually give directions and also distances of different places from the area where the inscriptions stand. In fact, these are direction giving and distance recording road signals, almost like our mileposts of present times. And these two inscriptions strikingly corroborate what the Greek ambassador Megasthenes described, that there was a royal road connecting Pataliputra with Susa in Iran. This description of a royal road comes very close to what is mentioned very categorically in Ashokan inscription of the royal road, and it is quite clear the Mauryas possibly took care of communication system. This could have been inadequate in terms of the present day facilities of communication, but the Mauryas were alive. Ashoka was alive to the importance of communication system within a vast realm. It's a large territory ruled by Ashoka. So there were regional seats of governance. Ashokan inscription speaks of the appointment of Kumaras or princes of blood royal at such regional centers. There were Kumaras at Tosali, which is present-day Dhauli area in Orissa near Bhubaneswar, at Ujjaini, which is in western part of Madhya Pradesh, at Taxila in Pakistan. There was also a Kumara called at Manimadesha, which is in eastern part of Madhya Pradesh. These are all princes of blood royal, almost acting as provincial governors. In addition to these four, there was also an Aryaputra, definitely a prince of blood royal, but possibly of a rank higher than the ordinary Kumaras. He is possibly the Yuvaraja, the heir designate in the Mauryan realm, that is perhaps the immediate would-be successor to Ashoka, who was placed at the southern administrative headquarters at Suvarnagiri in close to Kurnool area in Andhra Pradesh. Now, apart from these five headquarters and their provincial authorities belonging to the Mauryan house, royal house, there were also similar high-ranking administrators over regional units who were recruited from outside the royal family. At Kathiawar in the Girnar area, a later inscription of 150 AD informs us of the appointment of a Yavana Raja Tushasva, possibly an Iranian and not an Indian, a person of Indian extraction, was in charge of the Kathiawar area under Ashoka's suzerainty. Similarly, an Aramaic record speaks of a judge, Vakshu or Vasu, acting as a high-ranking officer looking after the northwestern region under Ashoka. So we have, for the management of the different regions within this vast realm, not merely centralized officers, but also regional political authorities. There is indication that all these Kumaras did not enjoy equal power and position. It is a complex network of distributing administrative functions to different seats of regional administration within this vast zone. It is true that the Mauryas were able to maintain a very large number of functionaries, administrative staff, and definitely a very powerful army under their command. And both required a very sound resource gathering system, that is collection of revenue. We have already talked about that. But perhaps mere conquest, administrative mechanism was not enough to integrate this vast area with enormous diversity in terms of ethnic groups, areas having different types of political systems, areas at different stages of socio-economic and cultural development, immense diversities in religio-cultural lifestyles. Something more was required, and that possibly came in the form of Asoka's Dhamma. Dhamma is the most salient feature of Asoka's statement in his inscriptions, and we would like to say a few words on that. The very word Dhamma in Prakrit definitely stands for the word Dharma in Sanskrit, which we normally try to denote by this term religion, religious beliefs, etc. Now, Asoka's Dhamma would definitely, therefore, in normal terms, would mean Asoka's own religion. And the moment we say this, we tend to consider that this is Asoka's personal religion. Asoka is a celebrated figure in the history of Buddhism. There is no doubt that he embraced Buddhism soon after the Kalinga War. His own inscriptions categorically tell us that he exerted as a lay follower of the Buddha, that is an upasaka, obviously indicating that he did not join the Sangha. He calls himself as a Buddhupasaka, that is, he is an upasaka of Buddha. His faith on Buddha Dharma Sangha is writ large in his inscription. There is absolutely no doubt that he did visit sacred places hallowed by the memory of the Buddha, like his visits to Lumbini Grama, the place of the nativity of the Master, at Sambodhi or Bodh Gaya, the place of the enlightenment of the Buddha. He did visit the stupa associated with a former Buddha named Konaka Muni. We are aware of his visit to Upanita Vihara in Manemadesha in eastern part of Madhya Pradesh. There is also well-known Buddhist legends that he sent out missions for propagation of Buddhism to various countries, including Sri Lanka and maybe some areas in Southeast Asia. These are later legends. The association of Asoka with Buddhism is also writ large in his inscription. There is no doubt that in his inscription he gives a list of Buddhist Pali canonical texts to be devoutly studied by Buddhist monks and nuns. In fact, these are the earliest known mention of Buddhist canonical text in inscriptions. Asoka strove very hard to prevent a breakup in the unity of the Buddhist Sangha. His attachment, personal attachment to Buddhism and Buddhist Sangha is beyond any doubt. So it is very tempting for us to immediately equate Asoka's Dhamma, the principal content of his inscriptions, with Buddhism and brand him as a Buddhist ruler. What the later Buddhist text would portray him as Dhammika Dhamma Raja, the ideal Buddhist king. But did Asoka's Dhamma immediately equate to Buddhism? The real problem comes when one looks at the Greek and Aramaic records. The term Dhamma in translation in these two languages and scripts do not speak of Buddhism as an equivalent of Dhamma. In Greek, it becomes Eusebia, which means piety. In Aramaic, it gives them data, which stands for law. It also, the other synonymous word in Aramaic for the Prakrita Dhamma is kasit, which means truth. So Ashoka perhaps did not want to convey necessarily Buddhism or his faith, personal faith in Buddhism, as equivalent to his Dhamma. What he meant by Dhamma, he does not define, but he speaks of certain virtues to be practiced or inculcated and certain vices to be avoided. In that perhaps lies the salient features of what he meant by Dhamma. He exhorts his subjects to practice liberality, charity, truthfulness, purity, and also the purity of thought. And he asks them to avoid cruelty, jealousy, pride. The non-killing of living beings stands out as a cornerstone of his policy of Dhamma. He personally leads the example by drastically reducing the number of animals to be slaughtered in the royal kitchen. And he says only a very few animals are now being killed for the royal kitchen, but that would be stopped in near future. In the year 16, since his coronation, he categorically speaks that he has driven away those subjects who were in excessive desire of hunting and gathering, hunting and killing animals, possibly a veiled displeasure against the hunting gathering group, possibly in forests area, and also the fisher folk. And in the year 26 since his coronation, he gives us a long list of birds and animals which were inviolable. The whole thing is guided by his principle that one living being cannot be sustained by another living being. Jive no jive no pusitaviye. What is very striking is that his Dhamma Mahamatras were instructed for the upliftment and welfare of Shramanas and Brahmanas alike, along with the Nirgranthas or the Jainas. There is no sectarian bias of Asoka in the appointment of the Dhamma Mahamatras. He also donated a cave shelter in Barabar Hills close to Gaya for the Ajivika monks. And in the history of India's religious, the rivalry and the debates between Buddhists and the Ajivikas, those who were believers in the mastery of destiny, is pretty well known. So Asoka is not following any sectarian policy. His policy of Dhamma is different from what he personally believed. And he always emphasizes on the augmentation of the essence of all religious beliefs and creeds, Saharabadhi. Now, in keeping with this, is it possible to consider Dhamma of Asoka as equivalent to Buddhism, and that he was trying to raise Buddhism to the status of a state cult? In the light of Asoka's inscriptions, it is impossible to substantiate this position. Dhamma, as Ramila Thapar very correctly pointed out, taking the cue from Nilakanta Shastri in an earlier 1952 publication, that Asoka's policy of Dhamma was very broad-based. There were certain principles, ethical code of conduct, certain social norms, which were so broad-based that no religious or sectarian group could have objected to it. Therefore, the broad-based character was in fact meant not for sectarian championing of a particular creed, but it was an ideology to weld a subcontinental society where there were immense plurality and diversity, particularly in the diverse belief systems in then India. The cementing bond was the policy of Dhamma, acting as an ideology. In later, B.N. Mukherjee cited the Greek edict of Asoka from Kandahar, and there found a very peculiar expression. This is an edict in Greek which largely summarizes the text in Prakrit of Rock Edict 12 and Rock Edict 13. And obviously Ashoka gives his ideas about what is Dhamma. Now, one of the virtues in Greek translation to be inculcated by subjects, obviously in the northwestern part, following Greek language and script, is, among one of the virtues, this is very striking. One of the virtues to be inculcated in this Greek text is to mind or have in mind firm devotion to the ruler's interest. Therefore, it is quite striking that Asoka demands from his subjects and also perhaps from his functionaries firm devotion to the interest of the ruler. That is, firm devotion to the ruler himself. And this elaborated statement is in fact an expansion of what appears in his Prakrit Rock Edict at Dridha Bhaktita, that is Dridha Bhaktita, firm devotion. The Prakrit Edict did not specify to whom this firm devotion goes. The Aramaic edict, the Greek edict tells us the firm devotion is to be shown to the ruler himself. So here, firm devotion, that is complete loyalty and allegiance to the ruler, is one of the components of Asoka's Dhamma. As part of his Dhamma program, openly declared that he viewed all his subjects, all his men, as his children. Sabe muni se pajamama. That's a celebrated statement, but it is not perhaps a one-way traffic. Asoka would consider all men as his children if perhaps there is unquestioned firm devotion of his subjects to the ruler. So there is that element of the demand of allegiance and obedience towards the ruler. A careful reading of Asoka's inscriptions indicate, yes, the Mauryan rule was very firmly established and having a degree of centripetality in the metropolitan state of Magadha and perhaps in the core areas of the Ganga Valley. But in the peripheral areas, one cannot see the penetration of the central authority with its dicta from one single center at Pataliputra. Therefore, the diverse powers and accommodation of authority at different regional centers. And in order to accommodate diversity, Asoka provides for us a wonderful political and philosophy and code of conduct in Dhamma. Through Dhamma, he at least recognizes the importance of plurality in Indian society, in politics, and in the daily life.